you want to focus on your two primaries, okay? So the highest number that you had, and I'll go ahead and disclose mine. I'm a internal dialogue and auditory thinker, okay? So I am an ID or AD and an auditory. That means that I prefer to represent the world around me through sounds and through the conversation that I have with myself about the world around me, okay? Most humans happen to be visual in nature, and then we have a primary, okay? So whether that's kinesthetic, did anybody get a high K? High K, okay, great. High K, awesome. So kinesthetic are our feelings. That means that you represent the world around you a lot too, how you get a sense about it. Your gut instinct, how it makes you feel, different things of that nature. Probably days that are sunny and nice and warm, or days that make you feel better, and days that are cold and dreary make you feel worse. And those are lots of times feelings people are that way. The reason that I put this up here is because today we are learning probably something new for most people in the room, okay? And this is the Dunning-Kruger effect. This chart indicates the thing that happens to most humans where when we first hear about something, we have all-time confidence. Like, oh, I know what this is, I've got this, right? And then as we begin to learn a little bit more about it, our confidence level starts to go down because we're like, oh, this is a much more complicated subject than I thought. So the average person who has the average education on a topic is normally at the lowest point of confidence in that area, okay? And then once you begin to get more experience and more knowledge, your confidence slowly begins to go back up as you become an expert, okay? So remember that this is a learning curve. It takes time. So even though you may be really confident with this topic at first, realize that it does take time and learning and gaining that knowledge and that experience before you actually begin to be able to implement that confidence, okay? That goes back to the 4 stages of the learning process. You don't know what you don't know. That becomes unconscious incompetence. So if you've never heard of a topic before, ever, then you can't know what you don't know about it, right? So like if you never learned how to tie your shoes, you wouldn't know how to tie your shoes. You wouldn't even know that there were such a thing as tying shoes. So unconscious incompetence is the first stage anytime we're learning anything. Once we know about it, now we're conscious about our incompetence. I know about it, but I'm still not good at it, right? Then we get to conscious competence. That's the time whenever you were learning how to drive a vehicle and it was 10 and 2 and you knew to check the mirrors and you knew to look, always looking and make sure that you are braking at the right time, and you had to think a lot about driving. And now, every single one of you, I could give you the keys to my car and you could drive my car, no problem. You would know exactly what to do, you're an expert at it. That's this place, unconscious competence. It's where I don't even have to think about it and I can do it. That's the mastery level. So at some point, that's where we want to get with NLP 6-step reframing, which is what we're going to learn today about how to find your own value, how to get rid of this problem of limiting self-doubt, okay? So what I'd like to do really quickly is let's go around the room and introduce ourselves just so everyone knows who's in the room. Would you mind starting for us?
Sure. My name is Beate Adler.
Fantastic, thank you so much for being here.
And I'm Carolyn Ingram.
Thank you, ma'am.
Victoria Waldron.
Thank you, Victoria.
Florence Johnson.
Lauren.
Brandon Stone.
Fantastic.
Robin Burrow.
Robin. This is Kneale. I'm James. Guys, I want to welcome you today. Today is about learning to love loneliness. What we're practicing today is neuro-linguistic programming, 6-step reframing. This is for whether you are working with clients, friends, family, or whether you're working with your own self-esteem and self-worth. This can be utilized for any of those aspects, okay? So in the 4 stages of the learning process, which is what we just learned, that's section 1. If you want to, everything that's highlighted in yellow, those are for our worksheets. So at the end of every section, we'll have questions that kind of reiterate the content and the curriculum that we just went over, all right? So what we just went over was the 4 stages of the learning process: unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. And you can write those down in the section 1.1. If you want to follow along, otherwise, you do not have to. This is not necessary, it's just something that I do in order for you to be able to utilize this and be able to remember what we went over. If you want to alter the course of your life, if you want to reach goals, if you want to destroy a flaw in your character, one must alter the subconscious drivers. the subconscious drivers which are causing those unwanted outcomes. Most people do not know how to do this, and therefore they are stuck forever in unconscious incompetence and incapable of knowing what they do not know. All right? Learning what you do not know. If you are currently failing at reaching any goals, it's time for you to acknowledge that you don't know what you don't know, and that's fine, right? That's actually a really powerful place, is whenever we acknowledge that we don't know what we don't know. So, it's absolutely okay and temporary if you choose to learn now. We can't know what we don't know yet. If you're at all interested in achieving your goals, the obstacles in your life, overcoming them, altering a behavior, you can now use this opportunity to learn a few techniques which are super easy to duplicate. Okay? Now, would anyone like to disclose what your language pattern preference was?
I'm the I.
You're an I. Okay, that's an internal dialogue. Did anybody have anything different? We got two K's here. Kinesthetic.
I.
You're an I, internal dialogue. Brandon?
A and I.
Auditory, digital, auditory and internal dialogue.
KI.
KI, kinesthetic, and internal dialogue. That's fantastic. Okay, so whenever we're talking to our kinesthetic people in the room, and I'm going to go ahead and we'll notice that they do utilize and make use of a lot of feeling words, okay? So whenever I'm communicating with somebody who's a feeler, I'm going to mirror a lot of those language patterns in order to make sure that we're on the same page, so that I'm understanding what they're talking about and I'm understanding what it is they're feeling while we're talking, okay? So whenever we talk about the importance of visualization, vocalization, sometimes this doesn't make as much sense to people who tend to be more kinesthetic, more feelers, because you don't have a tendency to represent the world to you through pictures and images. You represent it to how you're feeling, okay? So oftentimes what's important about mirror neurons and neuro-linguistic programming is understanding and embracing that you have to be able to visualize. You have to be able to clearly see vividly in your mind, in your imagination, the outcomes and the desires and the things that you want. Okay? So visualization is the representation of an object, a situation, or set of information as a chart or other image. Okay? And that's the formation of a mental image of something. So visualization, that's what it is. When we talk about visualization, that's what we're talking about. Okay? Vocalization is to make vocal, to utter, to articulate, to sing, anything of that nature. When we're talking about articulating and vocalizing, it means to get it out. All right? Oftentimes, you'll probably notice whenever you begin trying to describe a situation, a feeling, a circumstance, as you begin to vocalize it, it kind of starts to dematerialize. It kind of falls apart and you're like, that's not really right. I had it in my head, it was perfect, and then I started to talk about it and it fell apart, right? Have you ever had that experience? Okay, great. So
it's also the people that talk about things, and they're the people that have to talk about things in order to figure out what they think. That's how they reach their conclusions, is by talking about it.
Absolutely. And so our internal dialogue people, those of us that are IDs, that is the primary way that we try to come up with our ideas. And oftentimes we think we put it into really good words because we've been doing that in here, and then when we go to articulate it, it's not there, right? So that's oftentimes why we have to focus on actually vocalizing things, because when you're oftentimes having a conversation with yourself, you think that these are real words, that this is a real thing, that it's a reality, that it's real, but then when you go to put it into words, you realize, no, it was just a bunch of mental avatars. It was just a bunch of representations to myself, and then whenever I went to try to put it into a concrete reality, it's not there, okay? So that's why it's so important to be able to vocalize what it is that you're experiencing. And that's why we'll focus a lot on it. What are two ways to activate mirror neurons? Does everyone in here know what mirror neurons are? You probably do a bit because you and I met yesterday briefly. But anyone else? Okay, so what are mirror neurons?
Well, I associate it with attachment, like
Okay.
the newborn.
Okay, great. So explain that. That is really good, by the way.
Okay, well, I'll go with a new infant born, and the mirroring of the mother to the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Looking.
The baby were discovered was in a research lab. They were monitoring macaque monkeys, and they were training them by feeding them peanuts. Well, one day a researcher came in, and one of the macaques was hooked up to a monitor, and a researcher came in, grabbed a handful of peanuts, and started munching on them. When they did, the macaque's brain lit up like it was doing it. So the macaque, while it watched the researcher, eat the nuts, started digesting, started activating saliva, everything just like the macaque was doing that very thing. So what we discovered was all primates have mirror neurons, and it's one of the ways that we learn. It's one of the ways that our brain starts to know how to feel, know what to think, know what to do and how to respond. So whenever you see someone sucking on a lemon and your lips purse up and they salivate, those are mirror neurons. Your brain thinks you're doing it, and it begins to activate and react the same way. That's one of the reasons why whenever we watch a Rocky film or a film about an athletic team and they're working hard, it's one of the reasons why your heart starts pounding a little bit and why you start wanting to get in there and kind of, all right, I think I could do this. Mirror neurons. So what we do whenever we visualize, whenever we vocalize, we're activating those mirror neurons.
Right, so what you were just talking about is the baby and the mother, the baby seeing what the mother's doing and that way and stuff. But what James is talking about is it extends to visualization, like we can do that mentally, internally and stuff. And so they also did a study of people exercising. And they had a group of people exercising, a control group of people that didn't do any exercising, and then they had another group of people that they just sat and visualized that they were doing exercising. And they actually gained muscle mass compared to the group that didn't do anything, just because they took the time and went through their mind and visualized their body doing something.
Yeah, so it really does change physiology. It releases chemicals, endorphins, dopamine, all sorts of things, and it can create a real emotional limbic system anchor to certain emotional states. So one of the reasons that we introduced this early on is because while you're sitting here right now, you could visualize a time in your life whenever you were really excited, when you were really motivated, when you were really full of energy and passion. And if you were to really connect with that specific moment and think about yourself in that moment, think about how you felt, think about how you looked, think about how your posture was, how your demeanor was, how were you breathing, how would you have been carrying yourself in that moment, and really put yourself there. Within a matter of seconds, you will actually feel all of that. You will embrace that mentality, you will feel all of that. The mirror neurons will activate just from you imagining it, just from you focusing on it internally, okay? So as we go through this curriculum today, we're going to get to a 6-step reframing, which is just a simple pattern to follow in order to get somebody to reframe whatever they're mentally thinking in their mind about their current situation. We're able to get them from point A to point B rapidly using 6 steps. But in order for you to understand how it works, you first have to understand about mirror neurons, and that vocalization and visualization are ways to activate those mirror neurons.
And what he was also describing also ties into cognitive behavioral therapy. So many times we operate at the unconscious level and we have thoughts and then we experience emotions that perhaps we don't like and that affects our behaviors and stuff. And what James is talking about, when you take the time to actually stop and consciously focus on your thoughts and change what you're thinking, that changes how you feel, which is going to change your behavior.
Yeah, I like to tell this story. One time we were riding in the car, and my wife turned over to me and she starts rehashing a conversation that she had with a coworker. And as she's talking about it, she's getting more and more upset. And I turned her over to her and I said, it seems like this is getting you kind of upset. You know that it's not actually happening right now, right? And she just kind of looked at me and smirked at me and was like, what do you mean? I said, you're reliving it as if it's happening, and it's not. Me and you are just riding in the car, having a nice casual day. This isn't actually happening to you right now. And in that moment, she all of a sudden was just like, you're right. Why would I be upset about something that is not happening now? Because in her mind, it was happening now. She was reliving the exact conversation, the way it happened, as if that person were right there in the car with her.
But
So as she's
reflection is powerful, though. She was reflecting.
super powerful. However, when we reflect, do we have to allow our emotions to go to the same place they were in that moment? Or is it more powerful to realize that we are in control of our emotions now, and we can control our emotions about the way we felt about that situation now, because we're not in it anymore. A lot, yes, absolutely. So a lot of times whenever we work with people who have PTSD, that's what we do, is we get them to visualize and connect with a more powerful way of imagining that situation playing out.
And that's, like these presentations we're doing, they build on one another. So you don't have to have been here for the previous one, but the previous one we did a month ago was about EMDR. And
Yeah,
we
that was
talked
nice.
about and dealt with, trauma and PTSD.
And eye movement for visualization. So in EMDR, which is what Kneale was talking about, what we taught last time for PTSD and past trauma, we're focusing on getting the eye activation, the eyes moving while the person is reliving the situation. And what happens is when you get the eyes moving, most of the time you cannot recall a memory identically without the eyes going to a certain position to recall it. And I demonstrate that a lot with this simple demonstration. It's not anything personal, but what color shirt were you wearing yesterday, Kneale?
Blue, I think.
So did you see his eyes?
My eyes went
The
up.
eyes went up like this. Blue shirt. Okay, for him to recall that his eyes went to a certain direction. The same thing happens whenever people are remembering a past experience, a past trauma. You'll notice their eyes go a certain direction. Well, if I can change that pattern, I can change the association. Okay? So,
Also, I do a lot of grounding with my EMDR clients.
Absolutely.
One of them is finding that safe, calm place. Imaginary, maybe it's a tree in the backyard of grandma.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Now tell me about it. Remember that. That's a grounding skill.
And do you notice in your, whenever you're doing that, as the person begins to communicate, vocalize and visualize that place, don't they become more and more emotionally anchored to that state?
If it's a safe, calm place, not necessarily.
Okay,
No.
okay,
And they are starting to incorporate, maybe it's the ocean, and,
Mhm.
you can smell the ocean, you can feel the sand in your
Mhm.
feet and hear the birds going, and some people say there are a lot of voices, some people say nothing.
Mhm.
There are no people around,
Mhm.
so it's peaceful for them.
right.
And that's what you also.
Yeah, the safe
visualize
space.
that, or, be able to install that.
And that's one of the first things you do before you ever actually implement the technique. I think in phase 2 is getting that grounding in that safe space.
Right.
Yeah.
Robin, can you explain to everyone what you mean by grounding for those, as in here, who aren't therapists and who weren't at the previous workshop?
Okay, well, EMDR is the eye movement, and it is for clients that have, generally it's trauma in their childhood. And being able to identify, go back to that place where the trauma happened. But you wanna also give the skill, what is it that you can, because it can be very, when you're going back to the childhood, the memories start coming up and they may get agitated, and you want to be able to bring them back to a place to be calmer, to identify, deep breathing, get yourself back to the calm place, because it's not real.
It's not real. That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's really what we're doing a lot is in reframing, you're getting an understanding that the way I'm representing this to myself isn't real. It's a representation. It's a map of what I believe happened. But it's not really happening now.
Right.
So reframing is a way of giving yourself power over the way that you're representing your past or an experience to oneself.
I also, I look at it from a negative belief about yourself.
Sure.
And that's what you want to change to what would you like to believe now?
Right.
And
that is the real power behind reframing and why we're here on this particular topic. Because most people, when they have a negative feeling or association with being alone, especially through the holidays, through Valentine's Day, things of that nature, normally it has some sort of negative effect on the way they feel about themselves. And that's what we're trying to do. We're reframing that to allow you to value yourself, whether you're with somebody or whether you're by yourself, to really start to embrace the things about you that are fantastic and reframe the way you're seeing yourself. Let's look at yourself from a new way. Visualize yourself and vocalize the way that you'd like to believe about yourself, the way you'd like to feel about yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of times people get trapped on how they thought about a situation at a particular moment in time. And so what we're doing with this is, as time passes, as people gain more experiences and stuff, and then when you take the time to be able to reflect on that, you're able to change maybe your view or your perspective of how you initially saw something.
Absolutely. Yeah, so, and that was fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing that. Is there anything else you wanted to contribute about that?
Well, basically, I often talk with my clients about, you know, maybe here's a trauma. Well, there is the negative core belief, and that's really driving the show, even if you're 35. That is what is making you feel anxious or angry all the time or something. Go back there, and that's what is driving the show.
Absolutely.
Your life.
Mhm.
So being able to switch that to, you know, the freer feeling, wow, you know, being able to reframe it, be able to install a belief that you would prefer to believe about yourself is super powerful, because when you shine light on your negative core belief, it dies, it shrinks. It's the light of the positive belief that overtakes it.
Yeah, that's powerful.
So,
Thank you very much for sharing that. We're going to go ahead and move into page 4, section 2, page 4. What is NLP? NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And once again, anything highlighted can be filled in the blanks later on. Neuro refers to your neurology, which is the branch of medicine or biology that deals with the anatomy, functions, and organic disorders of nerves and the nervous system. Linguistic refers to language. Programming refers to how that neural language functions and influences behavior, beliefs, and actions. In other words, learning NLP is like learning the language of your own mind and how to identify the language of the minds of others. Okay? So right there, section 2, really short, just an introduction to what NLP is, why one would learn it, and what it's useful for.
I know we're moving into section 2. I just wanted to add one thing to section 1 real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we were talking about the 4 stages of learning, I think that I was probably first introduced to that in the book called Complaint-Free World. I'm not sure if you've read it. It was about a guy who, you know, at the first stage, he complained all the time. And he didn't realize he complained all the time. You know, it was at that unconscious incompetence level. And then at some point, someone pointed out to him, you are so negative, you complain all the time. And so then he had the conscious awareness of it, and he wanted to do something about it. He didn't want to be viewed that way. And so he started a thing where he wore like a wristband, and he had a goal to try to make a new habit. He wanted to go 21 days without complaining. And every time he noticed that he complained, he would switch, he didn't snap it, but he would switch it from one wrist to the other. And, you know, he'd get so far and then he'd complain. But when he noticed he complained, it started the 21 days over for him. And, you know, he'd get really far and then he'd realize, oh, I complained. And he asked, I think, his wife to be like his accountability partner. Like, if you see that I complain about something, not that I'm just making an observation or something, but actually complain, you know, I want you to let me know to help me with this so I can grow and become a better person and stuff. And I think it took him probably about 1.5 years before he was able to make it 21 days straight without complaining.
Wow.
That's awesome.
What was the name of the book?
It's called Complaint-Free World. But anyway, he talks about the 4 stages of learning in there.
I've heard of similar, you know, techniques and things that people use. I used a rubber band for anger. I used to have an issue with anger, and it wasn't to where it would cause me problems. I wouldn't lash out. I wouldn't yell. I just was uncomfortable. I was angry. I was upset. It was bothering me. It would stress me out that I was so angry about things that were so small. So I wore the rubber band on my wrist for a couple of months, and when I would notice that feeling of anger, I would kind of pop myself like, hey, snap out of it. You don't have to be mad. Let it go. And after a couple of months, it was amazing. As soon as anger would come, it would leave. And it was just that simple practice of being intentional about getting rid of that thing that was controlling. And it wasn't controlling my behavior, it was taking over my thought life, and I like having control over my thought life. So I like knowing that what I'm thinking about is intentional, it's not reactive, it's proactive. So that was my whole intention of
So
doing
that would be the third stage he was discussing about, you know, he was consciously becoming aware of it, he was becoming competent at stopping it.
Absolutely.
And now he doesn't wear the rubber band anymore,
Nope.
and it's becoming an unconscious thing.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
would the subconscious mind then associate pain
Pain
with
with anger.
that anger
That's why I did
and
it.
try to avoid it? Then?
That's why I did it. I knew I learned better from pain. I got spankings as a kid. I don't know if anybody else did. But for whatever reason, it works for me. I'm not saying that it's the best way for everyone. It worked for me. So.
And the rubber band snapping is not like super painful anyway, it's
No.
just a little uncomfortable.
It's a little
So it's associating an uncomfortable
Yeah,
physical
yeah,
feeling.
like on the ear, yeah, like wake up, quit being controlled by this, control it.
So it's associating that with a thought that you don't want to have. So.
Absolutely.
Because your body doesn't want to feel that uncomfortable feeling, so
Right,
then your
and-
mind's going to be like, I'm not going to go there towards that thought as often.
Well, you know, NCIS, I was thumped them in the head.
Yeah, there you go, absolutely. All right, so we already did section 3. We're going to now talk a bit about that before we go into 6-step reframing, because if you are a kinesthetic person, when we get into the 6-step reframing, those questions are going to come out with different answers than if you're a visual, auditory, or an internal dialogue person, okay? So whenever we're talking about learning to love oneself, learning to embrace being alone, learning to value oneself, what would be the problem that would be, why wouldn't someone be valuing themselves? What would be the problem? What is it that we're trying to eliminate? What does loneliness equate to? Why is it negative? For most people.
What's the belief behind it? What are some beliefs people think about?
Other people don't like me.
Other people don't like me. There you go.
Not good enough.
Not good enough. What else?
Something bad will happen if I am around people.
So maybe I avoid people.
Some sort of-
People are dangerous. People are scary.
Yeah.
Okay? People are annoying.
Not safe. People are not safe. So making that a connection, it's jeopardized.
I'm better than everybody else.
Right? So that could be part of the belief.
Right, it could
Could
be
be that I'm too
narcissistic.
good. I'm too good for someone else. Right?
You're annoying.
So, in 6-step reframing, whenever these things are coming out, people are annoying, right? Is annoying a feeling?
Yes.
It is, right? So we know right away when the problem comes out, whenever somebody's expressing it, kinesthetic, this is a feeler, okay? People are annoying, right? Not good enough, that's a quantifier, right? Quality, not good enough, that's an internal dialogue person. They're representing themselves with quantifiers, gauging this versus this, not good enough.
What if you have
I'm-
high ones though on like 3 that are like really high?
So those, in that order, is how your brain kind of organizes things.
Oh, okay.
But just remember that we all represent the world to ourselves using all of these language patterns. We just have a preferred.
Right.
So even though you may not be someone who prefers to represent the world to you visually, you're still capable. You're still capable of speaking that language. Might not be your first tongue, but it's still a language that you speak. Okay?
So your kinesthetic learners are also, it's physical feelings
Mhm.
as well. So,
Oh, that's a good point. That's
so
a good point.
A person that associates like maybe they're physically abused or something, so physical touch may be an issue for them, and the thoughts that come around that. That kind of ties into the love languages for those of you that are familiar with the 5 love languages. One of the primary love languages is physical touch. You know, some people, that is like the lowest on their love languages. They don't like to be touched. And so if they are with a person who, if that's their primary love language, then you're gonna have issues there.
One thing that's important to point out at this point is that kinesthetic is touch and emotions, and the brain can't tell the difference. So if I touch this and it's smooth, or if I'm standing here and I feel scared, those are identically real to a kinesthetic person. That feeling of fear is the same as this is smooth. They're identical to me. That's as real. So trying to tell somebody that's kinesthetic who's feeling afraid that that fear isn't real, you might as well be telling them that this table isn't smooth. They know it's real. They know it's real, they feel it's real. That feeling, that emotional feeling is as real to them. So it's really important to be able to understand that. As someone who's not kinesthetic, I don't understand that until I studied it. Because personally, feelings to me are not real at all. Emotional states aren't real to me because I'm not kinesthetic in nature. It's not the way that I primarily think about the world. So to me, this is smooth, that's real. I'm afraid, that's not real.
So also, your kinesthetic learners, they aren't going to be the ones that learn from reading a book or reading about it, an experience, or hearing about it from someone else.
They would do much better to have a 5-minute experience where you took them through an exercise where they learned it.
Or, and not
got
like
their body
sitting there
involved.
like thinking about it. Like,
Mhm.
So if you wanted to share the experience of like a roller coaster with someone who's never been on a roller coaster, if they read about it, it's not going to be a big deal to them. If you tell them about it and they're hearing about it, not a big deal to them. If they sit there and like try to imagine it, not a big deal to them. But once they actually experience it, for a kinesthetic learner, that's amazing for them.
Mhm.
It's real big as far as learning goes. Like when you trying to get them to do something, you used the example of tying your shoe earlier. If you like have them watch someone do it, or tell them about it, or tell them to sit and imagine it, they're not going to learn and comprehend as quickly that way as if you take their hands and move their hands through it.
Absolutely. He's totally right. One of the reasons why this is so powerful to know these language patterns, though, is because through neurolinguistic programming and through hypnotism, which are two things that I utilize in my practice, what you're going to do is you're going to start to utilize kinesthetic words. So if I wanted to teach somebody to tie their shoes who is kinesthetic, I would have them imagine the feeling of the thread against their fingers. And as you take the thread against your fingers, you're going to take one hand and you're going to go over the top. And as the top layers over the other side, I want you to feel it against your skin. I want you to feel it start to go into a real coarse loop. I'm going to use a lot of things that are feeling, that get them to really connect with how this feels to do this, okay? So that's why we want to utilize this type of knowledge, knowing and being able to identify the language patterns of others, so that I can speak their language and trying to get them to connect with something, with the reframe. So if I'm going into section 4, 6-step reframing, which is the actual technique that we would utilize to help somebody connect with the best version of themselves, to connect with a version of themselves that doesn't feel badly about being alone, that values themselves, then we start off with a really easy question: what's the problem? First of all, whenever somebody comes to you, what's the problem? And you're going to hear things like, I'm not good enough, not liked, people are annoying, people are dangerous, they're scary. I feel like I'm too good for most of the people that I'm around. I don't really want to be with them or anything. Kinesthetic people, touch and emotions, that's all going to come out like people are annoying type of thing, right? So when they give you that first thing, do you think that they're telling the truth? You think normally whenever you hear what the first problem is, you think that's really what the problem is?
Not really.
Not really. So that's why we go into question 2. Question 2 is where you really find out. Okay? Question 2 is where you really find out what the problem is. How do we ask that? Okay, so you're saying that you're not good enough. What's wrong with that? What's the problem with the problem? Why is the problem negative? What is this doing that's negative in your life? What's the problem with the problem?
Because lots of times there's a problem, but what they tell you as the problem is their judgment of the situation.
Absolutely. So we need to get to the core belief of why this is a problem to them. There is more to the story, right? So what's the problem with the problem gets a layer deep. The emotional, the painful, something negative that this is doing in my life. What's the problem with the problem? What's the problem with a self-limiting doubt? What's the problem whenever you feel badly about yourself? What's wrong with that? What's the problem with that? And if it's a kinesthetic person, you're going to get more kinesthetic answers. Well, it makes me feel badly about myself, which makes me not feel like I can do anything and I can't accomplish things. If they're more internal dialogue, well, what does it do if I feel like that I'm not good enough? Well, if I'm not good enough, then I'm never going to be able to achieve any of the things that I want to achieve. I'm never going to be able to be somebody worth anything or valuable to anyone. All that type of stuff is going to be internal dialogue. If they're visual, well, my future is going to not look the way that I want it to look. I'm not going to be able to achieve the things that I see myself wanting to achieve. So there's all sorts of different ways that when you ask the question, you're going to get their language pattern. You're going to start to extract how do they represent the world to themselves and why this is really a problem for them. Okay? How is the problem helping you? This is one that people oftentimes don't really actually entertain, because we all believe that whenever someone comes to us with a problem, that this is all negative. But if it was all negative, it wouldn't be a solution. It wouldn't be something that they grabbed onto as a way to solve the problem. So there's something that this type of mentality, this mindset is doing for them positive. What's it doing for you positive? Well, I guess, if I'm be honest, if I don't feel like I'm good enough, then I don't have to take any risks. It helps protect me from having to be embarrassed, having to get rejected. So this might be something that you hear coming from somebody whenever you say, what's it doing positively for you? Well, it's kind of protecting me.
Another example of that would be like maybe a child is being bullied at school.
Mm-hmm.
And they come in to like the counselor's office, and that's not their problem that they're identifying with. They're coming in and identifying their problem as, I'm sick all the time. Well, this right here, it's like, how's the problem helping you? The way that that problem's helping that child is that's helping that child avoid having to go to school. That's the result of it.
Absolutely, yeah. What's the problem? Well, I'm being bullied. Well, what's wrong with that? Why is that a big deal? Well, I don't want to go to class. It makes me feel sick. Ah, okay. So what's good about feeling sick? Why do you like to be out of class? Well, it protects me. I'm not getting picked on. That makes a lot of sense. Is there any other way that we can protect you and keep you from being picked on? That's step number 4.
I've heard of a lot of females who got extremely obese because they had been abused, and people then would not abuse them if they were no longer attractive.
So they put on weight on purpose in order to protect themselves from being abused. Okay?
Yeah, women do that sometimes. They'll cut their hair, like they don't want long hair because they think that's attractive. I don't want that attention.
Think they're too tall, they'll wear flats instead of wearing heels if they wanted to, because they feel like it makes them stand out. There's all
Or
sorts
they
of
wear
things.
sweats.
Yeah, sweats, things like that.
You know, sometimes if it's like sexual abuse and stuff, sometimes you'll have women where they'll like duct tape their breast to like flatten them out against their chest because they associate breast with like getting sexual attention, and they don't want that.
And that's one of the reasons why we're really intentional these days about not shaming people, about when things happen, not victimizing and making their fault whenever people are victimized, because shame causes these type of problems. So is there another way to get number 3? Step number 4, it's important to, once you've identified the positive thing that this problem is doing for your client, your patient, your friend, family member, whoever it is, once you identify the positive thing that it's doing for them, ask them if there's any other way to get that positive thing. If it's smoking, you know, what's good about smoking? Well, it makes me feel good. It gives me this sense of relaxation. I get to, you know, just kick back on my back porch. Okay, is there anything else that could give you that? Is there any other way you could get number 3? That positive feeling that you're getting from that. Is there any other way to get it?
Just like the example of what we were talking about with the kid at school, is there another way that we can help you feel protected? Can we switch your schedule or switch the other kid's schedule so that you're not in the same class together?
And if you'll notice, what the 6-step reframing does, all five steps are questions. So who are we asking for the working model? Who are we asking to present the solution? We're getting it from their brain, right? We're identifying with them, asking them to help us come up with a solution. Is there any other way to get that? Allowing them to come up with it. Once they come up with a solution that will work for them, then it's okay to move forward in the next step and then say, is it okay to let go of this problem then?
That's what a lot of people get stuck in that contemplative stage, and it was like, where is my action stage? I can't get to it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we want to identify first that this thing does have a negative aspect to it, that it is causing negativity in your life. Then we want to go ahead and embrace the fact that it also is doing something positive, probably in some areas, something that we're actually okay with. Identifying that there is another way to get that thing that we think that this is doing for us, that there's a healthier way, that there's a better way. And then we allow ourselves to let go of the problem. We ask them, okay, is it okay to let it go now?
And when I'm with clients in counseling sessions, I like try to brainstorm with them and have them come up with multiple other ways that they can address it, and then have them rank it. Like which one, I have them rank, which one do you think would work best?
The most effective to least effective.
And which one are you most willing to try? Because those aren't always the same.
Very good, yeah, very
You
good.
know, sometimes they think, well, I think this solution will probably work the best, but I'm not willing to do that for some other reason. And then you can explore that as well.
We talked about the 2 ways to activate mirror neurons. Does everybody remember what those 2 ways are? Those start with a V. Visualization and vocalization. What are we trying to do in step 3 and step 4? Visualization and vocalization. That's what we're doing. Is there another way to get number 3? We're asking them to come up with a scenario that would do number 3. They're going to have to visualize it, then they're going to have to vocalize it. What's happening in that scenario is they're activating mirror neurons, and they're seeing themselves play this out a different way than they have in the past. They're reframing it to try to come up with a solution that will do for them what this other isn't capable of doing and isn't doing well.
It's a little bit like motivational interviewing.
Absolutely.
Same things. What's the status quo? What changes can you make? What are you willing? How do you want to see what it is?
Absolutely.
You know, can you do
You got it. So then in step 5, whenever we do this and we ask, is it okay to let it go? This is a time, this is controversial. In neurolinguistic programming, you can make a note out to the side here. In neurolinguistic programming, and this has been extracted from Virginia Satir. I don't know if who all is familiar with Virginia Satir, but she was a family therapist and fantastic at what she did. But she would tell them to say thank you to the problem for its service, for what it did for us while we had it. Say thank you and let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay to thank your problem and dismiss it? Thank it for its time, for its service, for what it did to try to help you, but you no longer need it. So just say thank you, and thank you for trying to protect me. Thank you for trying to help me. I don't need you anymore. That's one of the things that happens in that is it okay to let it go stage. So I only did not include that because it's divided on, some people say, why would you thank your problem? Some people say, you thank your problem in order to acknowledge that you were trying, your brain was trying to help you.
It helps you to grow. That the people that, the camp that believes in thinking the problem is, you're thinking for the opportunity to grow as a person.
Right.
Is there also an aspect of it separates you from the problem?
Now, I believe that that's what is the intention there, is to visualize that this was a problem that I had, but it's not me. So you're separating and distinguishing, giving 2 specific variables. There's the problem, thank you, I don't need you, I'm leaving.
I think it's also a way to help visualize your control over your choice to remove it.
Sure.
So, you know, it's just like shut the door behind somebody.
Yeah, very good. It gives you an actual thing to maneuver and work with, a thing that you're saying thank you to. Right.
So, go ahead.
In substance abuse, we use it as a bioweapon.
Okay.
We act, you know, we do that actively.
Mm-hmm.
And we name what helped us.
Awesome.
And so if it's alcohol, we say what we liked about the alcohol, and maybe go through and then we say goodbye, don't need to do
That's the same exact principle that they're talking about there. Very good, very cool.
One thing I do in therapy is when people identify their problem, I have them almost treat that problem as a person and have conversations with your problem. So if someone comes to me and their problem is anxiety, I want you to have conversations with anxiety. So I had read a book called Love is Stronger Than Death. It was written by Peter Craig, who is a philosophy professor at Boston College. And he had a child who was diagnosed with a terminal illness. So he's a philosopher, right? What's his type of learning, do you think?
Oh, probably internal dialogue.
Internal dialogue, right? So he sees this as a problem. My child's dying. He's going to reflect, internal dialogue, think about it. So he writes a book on the philosophy of death, and he treats death as 5 different people. So when he starts out, he's viewing death, and he conceptualizes it as an angel, you know, the angel of death. He conceptualizes the angel of death as an enemy. You know, you're trying to take my child away from me. And he goes from enemy to, I'm probably going to forget one of them. One of them is like friend. One of them is like mother. I think the last one's like lover, and I'm missing one in there. I don't remember, but the way that he approaches the angel of death and the relationship, as he has relationships with other people in his life, like enemies and lovers and friends and his mother, helps him to change how he thinks about it and helps him come to peace and comes to terms with it.
Interesting. I'll have to check that out. Very cool. Number 6, step 6. Thanks for sharing that, Kneale. Step 6 is the completion of the 6-step reframe. A very, very powerful, very, very important moment. Now that you've said goodbye, now that you've thanked the problem for its service and you've dismissed it, you're supposed to visualize and become or step into the person who no longer has the problem. The person on the other side. How do you see your life changing? So then you get to play out the scenario. How has this changed your life? Now that you're no longer someone who has that problem, what's different? Okay? So this portion can take as long as it needs to take or as fast as it needs to be wrapped up. Typically, there are certain people who are like, oh, everything's different. I'm going to be able to go out, I'm going to be able to do my job, I'm going to meet new friends, blah, 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 blah. They're just going to start rattling it off, and as they do, they're thinking about it, they're visualizing it, they're vocalizing it, they're connecting to it. You can see their energy changing. You can see that everything has been effective. They don't have this problem anymore. They're ready to go. Other people are like, I don't know. I think this is going to work. I think things are going to be better. Have I mentioned anything real? Have I visualized anything? No, not really. I'm not actually talking about a future where I connect with the person who no longer has the problem. I need them to clearly see it. Paint me a picture. What does it look like? How does it sound? How does it feel now that you no longer have this problem? What's it feel like to be on the other side? You'll hear things like freedom, peace, all that type of stuff, but you want real representations. What does peace mean to you? Really? So it's going to feel like freedom. What does that mean to you? What comes to your mind when you think of freedom? You want to get it real solid pictures, real solid visualization, vocalization, so those mirror neurons activate, and this becomes a real moment where it's totally different. Okay?
And this can also change and it can be revisited. So what some people think their future self, what they want, what they desire, what it will be like if they remove this problem, they may remove that problem, and then they're not experiencing what they thought would happen once they removed that problem. So an example would be like, let's say a client came in to me and they say, I have a problem with alcohol and it's causing me all this anger. And so, we deal with the substance abuse issue and they quit drinking. They're not sober anymore, but maybe they still have a problem with anger. And they thought by eliminating the substance abuse problem would eliminate the anger. And sometimes, maybe that would be the case, but not necessarily are the two connected. They could have 2 separate problems. They could have a substance abuse problem and an anger problem. And so then you would deal with the anger problem. Sometimes someone would have a substance abuse anger problem and they would be intertwined. That they only get angry when they're under the influence. They eliminate the substance abuse problem, then maybe they don't have the anger problem anymore.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why it's so important to get them to visualize and vocalize what they believe the outcomes are going to be. It also helps with a well-known thing called confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance. When they start to experience anything that validates what they believed that they would start to see and experience, when they no longer have this problem, it confirms it. And it makes their belief even stronger that this actually was effective, that I actually don't have this problem anymore.
And that's why it's also important for people to work with someone and that holds them accountable, because if they think that that's what it's going to be, but then if their results aren't doing that, then they think this isn't working or whatever, and then that's where like the counselor, the therapist is going to guide them and, okay, so you've made progress on this, you've dealt with this substance abuse problem, but you're still continuing to have these anger issues, so maybe that connection wasn't as strong as what you thought it was, let's explore that, maybe this is maybe we need to focus just on the anger now.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Very, very good. And it's a lot of job security for most of the people in this room. So another way to reinforce those positive patterns. So with the remainder of section 4, what I've done is I have detailed out each step so that you will understand the easiest ways that I've found to get the person to actually visualize and vocalize while we're going through the 6-step process. You do not have to follow all 6 steps every single time once you understand the process of visualization and vocalization. This is a script. This is a technique, a method in order to give you an easy way to help somebody else connect with visualization and vocalization in order to change the way they feel about themselves, the way they feel about a past problem, an existing problem, anything like that. But this is first was the introduction into what this science is, neurolinguistic programming, and why it's effective, the visualization and vocalization to activate mirror neurons. And this gives you a script and a way of identifying people's language patterns. So if you are capable of being able to identify whether they're visual, auditory, kinesthetic, or internal dialogue, that will help you go through the script more easily. So that whenever you ask, what's the problem? And you start to get all of these visual things. Well, this is how it seems to me. It looks like this, and whenever I try to map out a plan, it's just I'm not seeing it come to fruition. Those are all visual words, and I can identify really quickly. This is a visual person. I'm going to need to talk back to them in visual terms. Or they may say, things just in my life, they keep sounding worse and worse. Every time I wake up, I hear the same horrible negative self-talk, and it doesn't seem like or sound like anything is ever going to change. It doesn't sound right to me. That's an auditory person. Chances are that person, I'm going to want to use a lot of those auditory words back to them in order to communicate well with them. Okay? Kinesthetic person, I really feel like this. I'm getting a sense that things aren't going well. My gut tells me this, and I'm just not feeling it. That's a kinesthetic person. I'm going to want to talk back to them kinesthetically. Does everyone kind of start to see and identify why it's so important to be able to identify the language patterns? Even if you have this script, when I start asking the question, what I'm going to get back is going to be a representation of what that person thinks the problem is. And if I don't communicate back to them effectively in the way that they've delivered that message to me, they're going to think I didn't hear them at all.
And this is helpful for everyone because not everyone's a therapist or has clients and work with people that way, but we all have people in our lives that we interact with, so we have parents and children and spouses and coworkers, and if you're able to figure out what's the way that they learn best, then like James was saying, you can use that language when you talk to them and approach them and stuff, because if you do it that way, you're going to have better results.
Absolutely, and whenever I get to the 6th step on reframing, it's really, really important for me to say, now I want you to imagine that version of yourself who's already solved this problem, and what comes to your mind when you think of that. Now, if this is a visual person, it's going to be images. If it's an auditory person, it's going to be what it sounds like. If it's kinesthetic, it's going to be now what it feels like. But it's important for me to allow them to create it, the version of them who's already solved the problem, and then make it real. So regardless of where they start, they might start with feelings, but then I want to get visuals. They might start with visuals, and then I want sounds. I'm going to try to create this picture of the version of them who solved this problem. I want it as vivid, clear, and real as we can possibly make it right now. And it's important to connect with that already solved the problem. Get them to imagine a version of themselves. Even without having found a specific solution, they will begin imagining a version of themselves who did find a solution.
And who do you think are going to be the best authors and the best teachers? Like authors, people are reading a book, so it's going to be for visual learners. But the best authors are the ones that realize there are 4 stages of learning, and in the way that they write and they describe things, they're going to do it in such a way so that all 4 people are experiencing it. So if they're writing about a conversation between 2 people, you know, the visual learner's reading about it, but the words that the author is going to use is they're going to discuss, you know, the sounds and the scenery, you know, the hearing of the birds chirping, and it's also going to discuss about, you know, the feeling for the kinesthetic, like the cool breeze, you know, that they feel going over their skin, and you know, the thoughts that these characters are having and stuff. So the author that is able to write about and use all 4 of those those are going to be the best authors because they've got a wider audience. You know, they're not just focused on just a quarter of the population. And the same with teachers that realize that, and they have a point that they're trying to get across to a student, and they're going over it, but in different ways, realizing that students have different learning styles, and by going over it in these different ways, they're presenting it in a way so that if they have students of any of the 4 learning styles in their class, that they're going to be able to learn what's being taught.
Absolutely. Very good. And those are called learning styles for teachers, and they actually get the same education, learning how to identify visual, auditory, kinesthetic, internal dialogue thinkers. Okay?
Be the same thing as a teacher teaching a class full of foreign students.
Yeah.
And then saying basically the same thing in Portuguese, English, French, and Japanese.
Absolutely.
So,
And yeah, it gives you just a little bit broader understanding of language, right? One of the things that I do oftentimes in these seminars is I'll say the word duck, and then I'll go around the room and ask everybody what they saw in their head. What happened in your mind whenever I said that word? Okay.
This is from the song that,
What is it?
it's, this song.
Is it the duck song?
The duck song?
I saw a duck,
You saw a duck. What color was the duck?
yellow,
A yellow duck? Was it a real duck or a toy duck?
it was real.
It was a real duck. Was it on water or?
On water.
It was on water. Was it moving or still?
Slightly moving.
Slightly moving?
I saw that.
What color?
Brown.
Brown duck? Was it on the water?
No, it was just standing there.
Just standing there all by itself, like on a white open, no grass around or anything?
No,
like
just
that?
grass.
Okay.
Nature around.
What'd you see?
Brown and white duck,
Brown white duck, a real duck or
real duck.
real duck?
A white duck, and then I ducked under it.
And went like this, duck down? What'd you think?
Mallard duck,
A mallard duck, like with the green head,
yes.
flying?
No scenery.
Okay, gotcha, no scenery.
Duck.
Okay, awesome. So what this does is it demonstrates that although we all heard the same word, no specific context, and we all immediately represented different things to ourselves. One of us had a song, one of us saw an animal, the other one saw it ducking down like this. We're all in real time translating language into what it means to us, and it's different for every person in here. So being able to identify the specific language styles of someone else and being able to understand how to extract from them what it is they're seeing to get a clear idea, a clear picture of what's going on in that person's head is a real skill. It's not something that everyone even knows. Imagine before you actually saw the experiment, you would think that if I say duck, everybody sees the same thing. We all have the same basic idea in our heads. No, we don't. And that's okay, right? So one of the things we want to do before we get out of here is learning how to help someone else identify with their true value, the things about them that they find truly valuable, okay? Because we want people to be able to self-identify as what it is that matters to me. So this is an exercise that I call pre-framing. You and I went through this a little bit yesterday. I want you to imagine that you are at an airport and you are about to leave on an awesome vacation. Can't wait to go on this trip, right? However, you're sitting there and you're waiting for the flight and all of a sudden you hear your name and 2 people behind you, you happen to start eavesdropping and they're talking about you. They mention 3 characteristics about you, and you walk away from this conversation on top of the world. You couldn't imagine anybody saying anything nicer than those 3 things. One person turned to the other person and said, "Do you know Kneale?" "Yeah, I know Kneale. He is this, this, and this." These 3 things. And Kneale's going to walk away from this and he's going to feel better about himself than he ever has. He's going to feel on top of the world. What are your 3 things that somebody just said about you? If you were sitting there, you're eavesdropping, you happen to hear your name, and that person says that person is this, this, and this. Those
Write them
3
down.
traits. Write them down.
We're not gonna collect them, so if you don't wanna share them, it's for yourself.
And these are my 3 that just came to my mind. Well, thank you very much. And that would be, for me, if I heard that, I was sitting there and somebody, "Do you know James Pesch?" "Yeah, I know James Pesch." I'll tell you what, that guy is knowledgeable. Talk about kind. And man, bold. Okay. I'm going to walk away from that on top of the world. Is that everything about me?
I would
No.
hope not.
Maybe not.
Probably not, right? But just those 3 things, if somebody walked away with that summary of me, if I knew definitively that I was sending at least that much information to every person I interacted with, if I walked away knowing that that's how they felt about me, that would be enough. That's good enough. What this is called is pre-framing, because when I think about how I look when I'm knowledgeable, when I think about how I look when I'm kind, when I think about how I look when I'm bold, when I say those words, when I write them down, I see that version of me. And I'm able to connect with it. I'm able to see that guy's posture. I know the way he presents himself. I know the way he talks. I know the way he walks. I know the way he interacts with others. I don't have to be reactive once I identify that this is who I am, and this is the person I'm going to present to the world, and it's what I value about myself. Once I've identified this, I'm pre-framing my behavior. I am dictating how I'm going to feel about myself, how I'm going to carry myself, and it's no longer reactive. I'm not wondering what people think about me. I'm intentional about it. I'm writing down what it is I want people to think about me. When I do that, I'm visualizing and vocalizing and activating mirror neurons, and that dictates my behavior. It changes the way that I fundamentally start to act.
Doesn't matter which order.
It does not matter which order, but once you've got those words down, say them back to yourself and check them. Are they right? Do they really hit here and make me go, yes, that's me?
And I encouraged all of you to write them down. And you want to write them down and not like type them or like type it on your phone or type it on a tablet or a laptop or something. There's a different area in your brain that's activated when you actually physically write something with your hand as opposed to typing it. And this is an important thing to do. I'll share a short little personal story. When I was in my early 30s, I went through a breakup and I was feeling bad about myself, and I was talking with a friend about it. And she's a therapist as well. And she's like, I think you're a great guy. I think you have a lot of qualities that are really attractive, that a lot of women would want to date you and stuff. And she's like, she challenged me to write a list and to read it before I went to bed every night. The last 3 thoughts you have before you fall asleep are usually what your brain processes throughout the night, and to read it first thing in the morning. And I took her advice. I did what she said, and I found it to be very helpful.
Awesome.
Because when you are in that negative place, and she helped me even come up with the list, when you are feeling bad about yourself, it's hard for you to think about what's good about me and stuff. And so if you're working with someone who's at a place that has a hard time thinking of positive things about themselves, or if you are yourself, that's when it's important to go to someone else that you know and love and trust and get their opinion and ask them to help you, and because they're going to share with you.
Absolutely. And I highly recommend steal my airport scenario. I mean, allow somebody to imagine themselves in an airport about to leave for a trip, and they're overhearing a conversation. It's super simple because I'm already setting it up that this is make-believe. We're pretending. So if somebody's having a hard time being able to pull out the things about them, the qualities about themselves that they admire, if I put it into an imaginary scenario and it's make-believe and it's pretend, a lot of times it's much easier for that person to come up in that scenario with what they'd like to overhear somebody else having said about them rather than what it is about themselves they already value. Does that make sense? So a lot of times this is an easy way of bypassing that first-person association where they can't develop that internal belief, that internal positive belief. Well, I'm actually asking them to get into the heads of somebody else.
And if you know that you're an auditory learner, instead of just reading it before you go to sleep at night too, say it aloud so that you actually hear it. You know, if you're the internal dialogue thinker learner, then sit with it and reflect with it for a little bit as
And
well.
what does it mean? What do these things mean? What do I think of when I think of knowledgeable? What does that mean? How does that affect my life? How does that change things around me? How do other people interact with me if I am knowledgeable? So
And
that's what I do as an internal dialogue thinker. I process it in that manner. What does that mean? Can I gauge it? Can I measure it? What would it look like? What would it sound like? What would it feel like?
In your kinesthetic learners, you're going to focus more on what emotion do I feel, what nuance of emotion, are there different emotions do I feel with each word?
Absolutely. When I think about being knowledgeable, because this is my word, if I were kinesthetic, when I think about being knowledgeable, how does it make me feel? When others think I'm knowledgeable and I'm able to help them with something because of my knowledge, how do I feel about that? Okay, so that's kinesthetic, really checking those emotions. Does it matter? Do I feel good about this feeling? Do I feel awesome about this feeling? Does that make sense? So we want to utilize this technique now for you personally, right now, so that you can make sure that you connect with your inner value, the pre-framing. How am I going to act? How am I going to represent myself to others? Those three characteristics, those three traits, allow your visualization, your vocalization to take over, activate those mirror neurons, and really connect with this. That way, it's easy for you to do this for others. That way you can help other people identify and quickly connect to pre-framing a better version of themselves. Somebody that they can relate to, that makes them feel strong, confident, and excited about the future. Excited about connecting with a solution to whatever their problem is. Okay? Because whenever you're in this state where you're thinking about two people just talked about you and said three of the most amazing things about you, it's really hard for you to be sad, down, and about any problem.
I thought you were gonna say something.
if they were saying negative stuff about you, how do you think that would affect you?
That's what I thought you were gonna
Right?
say.
And we would all go the opposite direction, right? If we happen to be sitting there, eavesdropping, we overhear somebody say our name and they say three awful things about us, it takes us completely the opposite direction, which is why this is such a powerful reframe, is to get people in that positive state. Anchored to that positivity, anchored to a better version of themselves, seeing that version of themselves in their mind, and then allowing them the opportunity to connect with that.
And we all have vibrational energies, so when you feel better about yourself, your body is emitting a different vibration than when you feel negative. And those of you that know about like the law of attraction stuff, especially if you are feeling lonely and you're wanting to find people to connect with and stuff, when you are vibrating at a higher frequency, you're going to connect with people at that frequency.
I like the example of doing the negative thing, because if you're having a problem finding the three good qualities, think, okay, what would be the worst three things I could hear, and then, okay, so what's the polar opposite of this?
Yes.
Right.
And that is going to be then your...
Yeah, that's a really powerful method to utilize no matter what. What's the antithesis of that? I use that a lot whenever people come to me with anxiety, depression, things of that nature. I go, okay, what are you feeling? Anxiety, and what would be the opposite of that? What would you be feeling if you were feeling what you want to feel? Because if they can, whatever, it's the exact opposite, whatever that means to you. What's the exact opposite of that? And if they can demonstrate that they have the capacity to give me the exact opposite, we're already miles ahead. Because people who are stuck in one emotional state typically can't even generate that opposite, what it is I want to feel. So if we can actually just get them there, we're already, half the battle's won. We just keep anchoring to that. Well, how would it look if you felt that way? How would it sound? How would you know that you felt that way? all that type of stuff, and then start getting down to those core beliefs. But you're right, that's a very, very useful technique, is to allow them to generate that negative state, and then go, okay, what would the opposite be? No, I know it's hard. Just imagine it. Let's pretend. If we could get to the opposite feeling, what would that feel like? You know?
That was powerful.
Yeah, and that way you bypass that first person association though, where I'm living it. It's awful. Everything's bad. We want to get beyond that, which is why I give several techniques to where you put them in somebody else's mind or make them imagine something. No, we're not saying this is real. We're pretending. Because even pretending is activating mirror neurons. They're connecting with it. They're having to see it. They're having to feel it. They're having to investigate it. And that changes emotional states. Is this helpful for everyone?
Very helpful.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here today. If you have any questions about any of this, Kneale is an excellent resource for any questions. Obviously, my name's on there. You have my business card. If you need anything from me, go to my website, sign up for the newsletter if you're interested and know about these events. I share all of that stuff weekly. And obviously, blogs, articles about all this stuff there. And if you have any questions about any of it, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.